Roundtable here on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. I hope everybody is doing well and looking forward to something and has somebody to love. We are here with the one and only Mr. Wizard. We are here with the additional one and only, the beekeeper, the man, the myth, the legend, Paula Powell from Maui. And we're going to get into it today, guys. How's it going?
Another day in paradise here, yeah.
That's right. That's right. You know, before we started the show, we were talking a little bit about patterns in life. And when I think about patterns, you know, the first time I really thought about patterns was when I was a young kid playing Pac-Man. And I used to go down to the arcade and, like, you know, I'd watch all the older kids play, and then, like, the kids who were really good could beat like 3 or 4 boards, and then you play enough quarters where you make that cool little slug with fishing wire on it, and you would put it down the machine and, like, get all the tokens on there. But you start realizing in Pac-Man there's a pattern that you can do where none of the ghosts will eat you. And, like, that was the first realization and the first time I really heard a pattern. But, you fast forward 40 years and you can look back on your life and see patterns in life, patterns in language, patterns in behavior. And you begin to understand that our lives, the things we think, our relationships can be a series of repeating patterns. What do you think about that?
Well, I would say, this thing between our ears, right, is just a giant pattern recognition machine, if you think about it. It's always, it can't focus on everything, so it's taking samples of stuff and looking for the patterns inside of that sensory data. And then if it's something like, when something crosses your peripheral vision that it doesn't recognize, you get that little bit of an alertness, you get that start, because that pattern doesn't fit in with the pattern that the room is supposed to be, right? There wasn't supposed to be anybody over there. So I think we're built inherently to recognize patterns, just from kind of the mechanistic, what it is to be a human.
Yeah, I think so too. Paul, you being someone who works with queen bees, do you see different patterns in the way that those hives, the broods of those hives, the queens of those hives, are there recognizable patterns in what you're doing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, queens usually lay in a spiral pattern.
Interesting.
So they'll start in the middle of the brood section and they'll spiral out and lay eggs in a spiral pattern. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, like you talking about, like, geometry in a beehive. It's all over the place. That it's definitely a pattern-full world. When it comes to honeybees.
Well, and it's not just honeybees; it's all nature, right? That's where we start to get into the things like the golden ratio, Fibonacci sequences. The ancient Greek phi. That's kind of how we've kind of related these patterns throughout, our symbology, our language, even the ancient architecture. You look at, the dimensions of the pyramid, and it seems to be a relative model for not just the Earth, but the Earth's relationship to the solar system. I mean, when you start to talk the calculations. So it's interesting. I think patterns kind of underlie just about everything. I don't think you could make an example that didn't have some sort of pattern that went into it.
There seems like a weird space where, all of us have these, we all have these different patterns that we recognize. And you can even say we're pattern recognizing machines. But on some level, we're always looking for something unique. Like we tend to value things that are different. Isn't that kind of like a dichotomy between us living in patterns, but then looking for something unique?
I think that's kind of almost like a false paradox. It's kind of similar, like the way our olfactory senses work is we don't actually smell smells, we smell the changes in smells. And so I think a lot of it is, where we basically have this operating system, this program that's running. We can tweak it, all sorts of different ways, from different inputs, how we sleep, how we exercise, the things we put in our body, all of our experiences, etc. But in that set of defined patterns, our brain and our system is always looking for things that don't fit in there. And I think this, this kind of gets into neuroscience, and you get into the reward system of the brain, and why we do the things we do, and then how it gets reinforced. And so, like, for instance, there's some interesting studies about ultradian cycles, which are like 90-minute cycles in your day. And they found that if you go and work out really intensely for that 90-minute cycle, and then you just rest and do nothing, just kind of almost sleep, but just kind of like a meditative rest, your mind plays back in reverse the last hour and a half. And it's looking for what you felt good about, what you might have felt was an error, and it's encoding those into how you're going to perform next time.
That's a beautiful example. Can you explain how we can use that in our life? Like, can you give me an example of how to put that in there?
Sure. So I mean, it's if you're out for a run, because I have a lot of running experience,
Right.
and you're finding yourself like gassing out or whatnot, or you take a bad step, you're actually, what's going to happen is, if you do this right, your mind is going to recognize that what that bad step was, associate the pain with it, and then create pathways, if they're there, for because you have different experiences of not taking that bad step, and it's going to reinforce all of that behavior. So not just the not taking the bad step, but the cascade of events that leads up to it. And that's kind of that encoding process.
And so presumably that, your body becomes more prepared for the next workout.
Correct. And then so when it encounters that again, it's less likely to make the same mistake.
Well, that's pretty interesting.
Obviously this is an equation, right? This is
Right.
There's variables in it. So that's not the only thing that's in play. I mean, if you're drunk, you're going to override all of that, and you're probably going to stumble and hurt yourself anyway. That's why drunk people are still drunk people. There's variables in the equation, but the underlying kind of forward motion of what we do to kind of move throughout day to day, and plan and associate, and what to focus on and what not to focus on, is through that process. At least as far as I've taken in with the research.
So is it more effective for vigorous types of activities?
It's actually not. It can be, well, I guess it could be mentally vigorous. It could be physically vigorous. It could just be whatever you're doing. It could be, it doesn't necessarily have to be vigorous. It could be also like memorizing guitar chords. And then, anything like that, any sort of thing that's going to involve any sort of neurocircuits.
I wonder if it's... Yeah, go ahead, George.
What about like relationships? Like, it seems it works in the opposite way with relationships. Like, it's not recording the best thing. Like, because I know some people that just constantly make the same mistake over and over in relationships.
Well, so this starts to get it. So that's the underlying, like, the physical mechanisms. And then we have these top-down mechanisms of control through, like, our neocortex and all these other things, where, that's where our emotions come into play. And that gets processed into this equation. And we all know emotions play a pretty strong role in how we feel about a situation, how we react to a situation. So in an unhealthy relationship, I think you wouldn't see a lot of that. But I think in a healthy relationship, if you were to step back, you would be able to pull out and be like, oh, my partner doesn't like when I do this, and so I haven't done this, and I didn't make a big effort out of it, but it was just something that naturally came to me because my emotional state was, I don't want to screw over my partner. I'm not emotionally hurt about this, so let's change my behavior. And those things can be, very much subconscious.
Interesting. Wow. So I wonder what the effect would be, like, if you like couple, psychedelics with, some sort of vigorous activity, whether it's mental or physical, and then if it was possible for, like the 90-minute cool down period, and how your brain would process all of that.
Well,
because we're actually unlocking and using and accessing different parts of our brain that, that we're not doing, at least, consciously, while we're, like lifting weights or going for a run, or,
right,
doing mathematical equations.
So those are all kind of correlated a little bit. So like lifting weights is a great example for this. You know, we all know you lift heavier weights, you get bigger muscles. There's that resistance training in there, right? And so when it's the same idea, you're kind of programming these neural pathways, you're working them out, you're flexing them. And so under a psychedelic experience, when you have all these novel pathways and connections between different parts of the brain, I think when we, you know, especially if you do this at a repetitive rate, you reinforce those neural pathways. And in that reinforcement, you know, all sorts of different things could be potentially possible. Now, I don't think people are going to start flying anytime soon, because, you know, there's still the laws of physics that we deem the laws of physics. But I think there's a lot to be said for human potential.
So you think that those pathways become more available to us?
The more you use it, just like the more you lift weights, the easier it is to lift weight.
Right, but without the use of psychedelics, like they become more available.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you have to figure some of these novel connections and the rearrangement of connections in the brain, some of them are going to be very ephemeral. They're going to just dissipate. Others, you know, as we know, if we reflect on these experiences, you still have a touch of that. You know, there's still something there. You can access it a bit. And the more you know, just like flexing a muscle, the more you work out that muscle, that neuroscience muscle, the more ability you have to access and use that firing of bioelectricity, biomechanics.
So any of you guys know anybody who's doing any sort of research work on this?
Me too. I am.
This guy. Yeah.
I have like a journal, and like I'm far from a scientist, although I play one on my podcast at times to time. But here's the way that I see it in my mind. Everybody's gone skiing before, and if you've gone skiing, maybe you've been lucky enough to get fresh tracks. Like you go up on the chairlift the first thing in the morning, and you're the first person to cut a groove into the snow. That's kind of the same way the connections are being made. The first time you go down the snow, you know what? You're kind of fishtailing a little bit because there's no grooves. But by midday, that trail that someone cut, it's all iced over and it's the water's flowing down. You can see the mud. It's the same way your thoughts move through your brain. And I think the psychedelics allow you to get sort of like a fresh track for it. And I want to add to that, like, I believe that it can be even more enhanced. I think that if you're going to use psychedelics in any sort of human optimization program, that you would best be served by stacking it with human growth hormone, and for guys, testosterone, because I think that those two work in conjunction with one another. It'd be like going down fresh tracks with you in a snowmobile behind you or in front of you, maybe. And so I've taken a journal, and I feel that during the height of a psychedelic experience, you have this overwhelming sensation of a height of awareness. And that, in my opinion, is the new trails being cut. Hey, whoa, I'm having this new thought, or I'm having this new emotion about this thing. That's a new connection being made in real time. And then when you're through your trip, you come down on this psychological, bent, where you start thinking about things like, I wonder why that is. That's you strengthening that passageway. And tomorrow, it may not be as deep. Tomorrow, it may have scabbed over in a way, but it's still there. Or if you want another metaphor, it's like going hiking for the first time and taking ribbons with you and making your own trail. You got to take the ribbons the first few times so you can mark it. But in a month or 2 months, if it's a good trail and you've gotten access to it, pretty soon you don't need those ribbons because you can just follow the footpath.
No, that's a wonderful analogy. Well said. I think the fresh tracks in powder is a beautiful way to look at it, because that's very much what's happening. And then, to extend that a little bit more, now you go back 2 days later, right? So now I've had 2 days from my trip. Now I go back 2 days later. There's some of those pathways still in there. But if all of a sudden it snowed again, if all of a sudden I've been distracted from what that reflection period of that psychedelic experience, and I'm just back on life, and it snowed again, you can still see a little bit of the track, but, it's kind of been glossed over. But if you were to go up every single day and rewrite that same track, that's your track. Just like going up and planning the hiking, eventually you get that trail. That's just a defined trail through the woods.
This is exactly why I think that this is the power behind the idea of people coaching or people being someone you go to learn. And I know we don't all agree, or maybe we do agree. That coaching is something, but someone who has experience in something can at least point people in the right direction. Hey, keep your nose up. Hey, lean back a little bit. You can't tell them which trail to take, but you can instruct them on some of the obstacles that may be in their way. And I think that, Paul and I were talking about this last night, Ben. The idea of coaching, the idea of having someone there, I'm not sure I can understand why you would need somebody more than once as like a coach or something like that. What do you think?
I think that really depends on the person receiving the coaching and what they're, because I would argue you don't need a coach if you're willing to just do it, go full bore. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. You might even hurt yourself, but as long as you're willing to commit to that, you don't necessarily need a coach. But I don't think everybody has the time or necessarily the emotional availability to do that for themselves. I mean, a lot of people are locked up in so many different things. And so I think that's where, the idea of a coach, the idea of a shaman in older days, I think that's where they kind of come into play, is they're kind of the facilitator, the bridge between those two worlds.
It's like going to
a ferryman. Yeah, the ferryman. Yeah.
That's a good point. It's like going to Squaw Valley. I'm going to run the bunny hill twice, and I'm going to get somebody to teach me how to go down the big hill. Instead of just going up the diamond and being like, I'm going to go. I'm probably going to crash, but I'm going to go.
Right, but it's kind of the same idea as throwing a kid in the water. Yeah, they're going to drown, but they're going to learn in drowning that they don't want to drown. And so how do I not drown? I start to flail, and I get up, and I learn how to swim. I think, and we could probably find an exceptional amount of examples throughout, kids and raising and all of this stuff. But I think there is a need for coaching in the world, because not everybody has all the answers all the time. Even if you have the knowledge, sometimes your emotional state can take you out of the ability to be able to recognize that. Just look at like shock, for instance, right? When people go into shock, that it shuts off. There is no rationality anymore.
Paul had a really good idea for a retreat. Paul, can you share that idea?
Yeah, I'm not a retreat type of person. It's like, I don't know. I don't really believe in retreats.
I'm not. Yeah.
So I mean, I hear about people's experience with retreats, right? And Kev shared one when he was, a few weeks ago on here about, like sitting in a tent and just like some guy breathing on him, and like all you can think is like it's freaking hot in here, and I need to get the hell out of here, type of situation. And to me, it's like I talk to people who go on retreats, and that's kind of typical for like, it doesn't matter like what they're doing. There's like seems to be some sort of level of like somebody coming at you with like what you need to be doing, or some level of uncomfort, so that you can accomplish this goal that you set out to do while you're on this retreat. And so, my idea with the retreat was like, come to me, give me $500, I'll kick you in the balls, you go home, and then we save a lot of time.
You know what? For some people, that might be surprisingly effective. But
we were talking about it last night a little bit.
No, I agree. I've never been a retreat guy. I've never been. It was, and I would even go even further than that. I remember showing up to high school for the first time, and all the incoming freshmen knew the song of the high school. And I was like, what is this? Did you all go to summer camp to learn this shit? Like, what are we doing here? Like, I just showed up like 5 minutes ago. Everybody's singing it, and I'm like, oh gosh. And I've always had that same kind of response to everything. It's like, I've never been a fan. I don't indulge in fandom. It was never my thing. So, but at the same time, I think a lot of those retreats are just money grabs. And I think if we're really being honest with the situation and what's happening, I'd say 99% of them, maybe 9.9% of them are probably money grabs. I think whenever you're taking like this idea that we could have this group experience that's supposed to be this very personalized, reflective, I'm looking in my own personal mirror, kind of experience that psychedelics gives, and then you thrust the group into it. I don't know that that's always a great idea. In fact, I would argue it's probably not a great idea most of the time. Now, will people get some benefit from it? I mean, if you've never gone to camp and been around people and had that camaraderie, and then you have the psychedelic experience, you're probably going to love the hell out of it. Why wouldn't you, right? I mean, you're being accepted in a sense by peers, by other humans, and that always feels good. So I think that's kind of the allure. And then you have these celebrities who then, it changed my life, and it gets conflated.
For sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, go ahead, George. I'm good.
I'm a big fan of language, and it's so interesting to me how sometimes the writing is on the wall. Like when you think of history, you think of his story. Oh, it's some stories people made up. When I think of people going on a retreat, I think of the word retreat. Like, where is the strength in retreating? Like, retreating means you're running away. Retreating is something that is not something that you should strive to. You shouldn't strive to retreat. Retreat is something you do when you don't have any other things that you can do. You're going to retreat. Right? You're going to run away.
So there's another etymology to that too, though.
Okay.
Because you have as a root, meaning to repeat, and then you have treat as in like maybe treating a wound. But then you could also even have treat as in treating oneself, right? And so I think, to your point, I think the language is very important. Words are important. I think, depending on who is guiding the people down that path will determine very much what sort of retreat they're experiencing.
But I would push back on that and say, if you're going to retreat someone, that means the first treatment didn't work. Right. So the treatment you're retreating someone with something that didn't work.
Right. Right, and but here's the thing. Sometimes you need to, like when you, for instance, like if we're taking antibiotic or you're dressing a wound, right? You redress the wound because you don't want it to get infected because it's not healed yet. So I think you could wordplay yourself, in a lot of different ways into this. I think, but I don't. But at the same time, I don't really think retreat ever really. It doesn't really jump over the bridge to that personal experience.
Yeah. It could be a better explanation. I think that maybe a men's group or something has a little more masculinity to it, or, some sort of...
The Elks Club.
Yeah. How about the mystery schools, right? Yeah.
You heard this new Achilles that's going around. Anybody read it?
What's
it called? Okay. Ben, I'm going to share a story with you. And you tell me what you think, okay?
All right.
I got some cool friends. You guys are obviously some of them. And just like you guys, these gentlemen like to read. And so every now and then, I'll stop by their house and we'll talk about different books. And about a month ago, I stopped by these guys' house and they go, "Oh, George, how's it going? Little cocktail talk, chit chat. Hey, have you, George, you've read like the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Homeric verses? Oh yeah, I love those, man. I really enjoy it. I'm a big Joseph Campbell fan, so I'm a fan of myth." And my friend comes out and he's got this book and he goes, "George, I got this book for you. You're gonna love it." I go, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, it's called Achilles. You know that story, right?" I go, "Yeah, fantastic." And he goes, "Well, this one's a little different." I'm like, "Really? How?" He's like, "Well, in this book, Achilles is a homosexual, and he has a lot of torrid romance affairs with Agamemnon. Like, it's just really gritty."
Okay.
And I'm like,
so it's like Greek mythology fan fiction.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. And I'm thinking, I kind of like the original version, but I don't. I gotta be honest with you, I'm probably not gonna read that.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, "Why not?" And I'm like, "I got a lot of other stuff I can read, and to be honest, I just that doesn't something that appeals to me. I'm not saying it's bad, but it doesn't appeal to me." And he's like, "Well, have you seen Brokeback Mountain?" And I'm like, "Nope, I haven't seen that." And then he hits this. He goes, "Do you think that maybe it's because you're homophobic?"
Yeah, I saw that one coming.
dude.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was so offended in some ways, you know.
Well,
and
you
I was
should
like,
be.
man.
You should be a little offended.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, you should be a little offended.
Yeah. And so, I thought about, he goes, why don't you just take the book and just give it a read? And, I'm out, and like his wife was up there, and she's like, oh, just leave George alone. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Thinking, like, leave me alone, man. But I take the book because I'm a nice guy, and I take it and I put it in my truck, and I in my work truck, and I just set it on the back shelf there, and I kind of forget about it. But as I'm just driving, thinking about all this stuff, and I'm like, man, that's so crazy. Like, I'm totally not that way. In fact, what so I just thought about it for a while, and then another week goes by, and I went back to their house, and he comes out, hey George, did you read that book? And I go, you know what? I did not read it. As a matter of fact, I have it right here. But I did think about what you told me. And the more that I thought about what you told me and how you told me, I realized what you were telling me. And so I would like to give this book back to you and tell you that I just want to be your friend, that I'm not like that. And it was like, he just looked at me like, well played. But that was on my mind. Like, I don't know why. Like that, it was a funny story to me,
Yeah, it is a funny story. And, and it's wild because all of a sudden, this day and age, back when I was growing up, you didn't talk about religion, politics, and all these things. Yeah. You didn't put your beliefs on somebody else, essentially, is what it came down to. And that wasn't the kind of respectful thing to do in conversation. But now it's, if you don't hold my belief, there must be something wrong with you. And that's a concurrent part of conversation, especially the conversations that are kind of dictating policy, which is very scary. But it's a wild thing, and you're not homophobic for not wanting to watch Brokeback Mountain. It doesn't appeal to you. Right. It's one of it has nothing to do with the homoeroticism. It has nothing to do with the sexuality. It was just, as a whole, it didn't appeal to you. And I kind of went through this in my travels, and to the point where I actually moved in with some gay guys because they were doing a web design business and they needed another web designer, and it was a good, sweet kind of deal. And so I was like, you know what? I'm not homophobic. I'm just gonna go see how this is. And then from a scientist perspective, I get a view of something that I'm living with these guys, right? And I've lived with a lot of women, but I'll tell you, the passive aggressive nature in that house was, I couldn't handle it. I mean, it was eventually, it was like, I would show up to the sink and there's notes left on the pots. It's like, this is still dirty. And I'm like, oh, what the fuck? I'm like, oh man, oh shit. It was a catastrophe eventually. And I was, we parted ways as friends, but after about a month of living there, I realized, wow, that's just an entirely different lifestyle. That just isn't me. Right.
Yeah. It's an interesting concept to think about. It's just weird how different people have different ways of trying to validate how they feel by getting other people to do things. You know what I mean? In some ways, I think that's people are trying to say, hey, I've done these things. Why don't you do them?
Well, that's what you use when you don't have the intellectual argument, when you don't have the evidence, when you don't have the knowledge to support whatever your philosophical foundation is on life. It's, you have to try this because I tried it, and then you'll know what I mean. That's not how you really sell somebody, A, but B, that's where a lot of this is. A lot of people are so wishy-washy on their philosophical foundations. We're morally bankrupt from many different perspectives. Ethics, who knows what ethics is anymore? You'll get 20 definitions from 20 different professors these days. The Hippocratic Oath, what's that now, right? These are all of these things are, we've gone into the realms of absurdity in all of them, it seems.
Something that you said about people having conversations about, religion and politics and money and stuff like that, and they weren't really like those are conversations that people frowned upon, and in a lot of ways still do frown upon amongst friends or coworkers or whatever.
Right.
I would have to disagree. I don't think that the intent of those of like telling people these aren't things that we talk about amongst friends is because of, you know, offending somebody. Well, you know, putting your belief system onto somebody else. I think it has everything to do with the fact that most people aren't equipped to have those types of conversations. You know, conversations that, you know, have, you know, a higher probability of becoming emotional.
I don't
And
think you're wrong at all. But I would say because of that, then people are less likely to want to have those conversations because there's kind of the underlying knowledge that that's where it's going to end up, is in
right,
some sort of emotional state, right?
yeah, and that's a shame. I mean, don't you think like, you know, we should be better equipping people in this country, especially like young people, to
100%.
be able to have conversations like that, you know, where, you know, there's a chance that can become emotional. But how do you, you know what I mean? How do you, you know, spot that it's becoming emotional? How do you understand like when the conversation is going off the rails? You know, I think to me that's like, that's the difference between like, you know, back in the day, these conversations were for gentlemen, right? Like this was for gentlemen. This was gentlemanly conversation, and I don't think it was mostly because people would have disagreements that, you know, that were irreconcilable. I think it's because they understood, like when we talk about debate, when we talk about, you know, having proper discussions with people, that their educational background armed them, equipped them to be able to have these conversations in a manner that kept, you know, emotion out of it. Whereas like nowadays, there's so many people that just aren't able to even have the most basic conversations, you know, like left Twix and right Twix without getting emotional about it, you know, because they
You
don't
don't need them at the
understand.
same time? What?
Yeah, right. You know, at the same time. But you know what I'm saying? So
Yes.
it's like, you know, the you know, society has always said this. Like my parents said this to me when I was a kid, like, oh, stuff you don't talk about. And it's like as I got older, I was like, well, why
Why
not?
not? Yeah.
There
Well,
should be no reason why we can't have these discussions if everybody learns how to have a proper discussion.
right.
You
Hence,
know, but
well, and you know, hence our discussions, right? If you look at the main topics of what we talked about, we pretty much broach all those every single episode. And we managed to do it without berating each other and being dicks. And I, you know, so it's leading by example at some point. But you know, I think, you know, one of the points you made in there is that, you know, it was reserved for people who had the intellectual and emotional capacity to talk about these. And I think a lot of that reason was because you would actually get people who would be so emotionally distraught that it would ruin relationships, it would cause feuds, it would cause murders. You know, especially when you have, you know, people who are very much attached to these ideals, and then all of a sudden somebody's like, oh no, yeah, that's kind of silly, don't you think? People have been shot
yeah,
for that many times. Crusades have been waged over this. You know, this is something that we have a lot of history of killing each other over when we have these sorts of disagreements and aren't able to come to an intellectual table and discuss them. And you know, to further that point, we've talked a little bit about it before. The average education level in the United States is sixth grade. 20% of people, 18% of people are potentially illiterate in this country. That does
That
not that does not breed a great conversation ground typically.
and that's by design. Like that was, you know, if you look
oh,
back at, yeah,
Well, it
here you
was.
go.
Well, it was.
Here's what I know. If you look back to the Prussian school model that was brought in by like John Dewey and all this stuff, just look at the way in which schools are taught. This is the Prussian school model. And it was said that we don't need to teach kids. Like there was stuff purposely left out, and that was critical thinking. That was this idea to handle conversations. We don't need artists. We don't need poets. We need workers. That's what was decided at the turn of the century, where you're going to have people come in. There's going to be one person that stands in front of the class, and they're going to shoot them in a Pavlovian methodology,
An
where
appeal
they
to authority.
stimulus first and appeal to authority. We're not going to teach them this. They're not going to learn through literature because they're not going to read literature. They don't need to know that. They need to know how to read to this level, and that's it. We don't want them being there. And if you look at it from that angle, why? It's like this. There are nuances in conversations where people say, look, this is, I'm sorry that these particular people are dumb. They're probably going to always be dumb. We know what's best for them. That's a fact. That conversation happens all the time. All the time. But you know what? You don't want those people that are dumb to start asking some questions, because that causes problems for you or maybe your kid. That's a huge problem. Just start asking questions about voting. Start asking these questions about any sort of critical thing. And the first thing that happens is you're a conspiracy theorist. All of a sudden, there's an ad hominem attack thrown against you by people that are supposed to be intelligent. The very emergence of a logical fallacy shows you that there's a huge problem facing us. And when you look at things like No Child Left Behind, like I remember in 8th grade, there was a kid driving himself to school, man. Like this was before No Child Left Behind. My friend Rico, man, he had a smoking hot girlfriend. Like, look at this guy, man. Like 6'2". Like there were kids that got left behind, but they became the badass because they stayed in the same grade and got older and older and older until they couldn't. But the whole idea of these processes is to push people through the program regardless of what they know. And it's not because we care about them. Like that, if we cared about them, we would do things to make them more educated. But that's the plan. And I don't, you can look back at the literature there. You can look back at books like Tragedy and Hope. You can look back at the work of I think her name's Cheryl Elzerby. There's all these people that have written. Just look back at John Dewey. It's it's in the books. It says, here's what we're doing.
It's a sad thing. Because to your point, it's the critical thinking. It's all of these stuff, but that appeal to authority really became kind of foundational to all of this. And if you look at what's happening today in the world, it's everything's an appeal to authority. There was and I think one of the other important things is when you do that, you remove the ability for conflict resolution at the local and personal level. Now, all of a sudden, me and Billy get into a fight, and Billy punches me, I punch him back. Now the cops have to be called. Now the principal has to get involved. Now the parents have to show up. That wasn't always the case, and both kids get expelled these days. That wasn't always the case. Me and Billy would have beat the shit out of each other in 1982, and, we probably would have ended up friends. Because we're really not all that different. We're hanging out in the same areas. We're talking about the same things. We're having similar experiences. One kid just thought he was badder ass than the other kid. And without having that conflict resolution between people, this is where I think you end up with a lot of this massive dysphoria in the world. People unable to figure out where they fit. Because they've never found a place to fit. They've never tried to fit. And every time that they would try to fit, it was always circumvented and taken care of.
Huh.
Yeah, I think that there's certain decisions that are made for you. If you look at the culture, hey, you can be a plumber, you can be a dentist. There's all these defined paths for you, but you didn't really define any of those paths. Like they're like cookie cutters. Like you can be any of these things. It's kind of like this idea that Paul and I were talking about last night, like the illusion of choice. Like you think you have choice, but you don't really. Like you don't really have the opportunities that you think that you do. I'm not saying you can't make something of yourself. You totally can, but it's an ever dwindling set of choices that it faces. Like I don't think the kids today have the choices that we had. I don't think that we had the freedom that our parents had. Just look at bankruptcy laws. When I was a kid, you could declare bankruptcy as many times as you want and start over. But they chopped that right out because hey, that's too many guys on the bottom making it, man. And it's just this idea of consolidation. And when you consolidate, you're taking away choices. The same way that Pepsi or Coca-Cola buys up all these startups. Like that's their method to grow. And they no longer make their own products. They just buy the ones that are coming up that could be competition in the future. And when you do that, you buy up the competition before they can become a threat. You're taking away choices. You're taking those right off the table and slapping your label on it and saying, here you go.
I agree mostly, but I would say there's also, there's still the freedom of choice. There's a different set of consequences associated to it. Because now if I want to go against that that monolith of Pepsi or Coca-Cola, I can still do it, but it's probably going to be detrimental to me at a business level, to the point where I might not even be able to make it from a business perspective, right? There's still the choice to do so. The consequences of that choice have changed, however.
And the incentives.
And the incentives. And the responsibilities.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating to think about. It kind of takes me down this same road of transparency. Like, I've been thinking about this for a while. It seems when, at least in my silly mind, I always thought that this idea of transparency is what we need. We need transparency in government. We need transparency in the monetary system. And it seems like such a beautiful thing to say, because on the surface it seems so true. But the more you dive down that rabbit hole, the more you realize that transparency is just a nice word, a nice way of saying surveillance. And those are the transparency, surveillance, and they're kind of similar there. And it seems like transparency was the short dress that the hot girl was wearing, but she's really a daydream, she's really a nightmare, just like a daydream. You know what I mean? Like, it seems like it's awesome. But then you're like, wait a minute, this is not what I thought it was. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it depends on we say transparency, and you're equating it to, surveillance. Like, surveillance happening like when something is viewing something else. But there are levels of transparency or types of transparency where the information is freely given, right? The information is being made public in a way so that anybody can view it. It's not like, some giant watchdog situation coming down and trying to gather information so it can be viewed.
Okay, can you tell me a time, can you guys think of a time where transparency doesn't slide into surveillance? I guess that's kind of my friction point.
So what I think, transparent, like people aren't being transparent enough, and so like Big Brother's got to come in and say, like, okay, well, we feel like you're not being transparent enough, and so therefore we're going to watch you and see what's happening. I mean, I think that's always going to be the case, because it's always going to be whatever you're, if it's an entity or a business or government or whatever it is that's trying to be transparent. Hell, I mean, like even, your school or, your workplace, there's always going to be people that aren't satisfied with the level of transparency. And then it's about like, it comes down to like little things, what one person thinks should be made available isn't necessarily what other people are going to feel, needs to be made available. Right. So then the thing gets drawn, then someone's going to sue somebody, take them to court, and then the judge is going to decide whether or not, like some of these things need to be available to people or not, So usually the problem with like transparency is like, yeah, I can come out and say, hey, I'm going to be really transparent. But unless you define what it is you're going to be transparent about, you're not going to satisfy everybody. There's always going to be somebody out there, that's going to think that, you're not doing a good enough job.
Well, I think at some level from the top down, it's an abuse of words. Because transparency, if you were to be transparent, there would be no withholding. There would be no side budgets. There would be no black budgets. There would be no things that we don't tell people about because we don't think they can handle it. There would be none of that if there was true transparency. Now, when you get to the true transparency, then you get the pushback of, oh, but then our enemies will take advantage of us, so we can't have true transparency. And that's typically the kind of that dichotomy that happens at kind of a larger level in the world. Interestingly, cryptocurrencies really apply to this situation because you have something like, we'll start with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is pseudo-anonymous. So if I want to stay anonymous and I work at it, there are ways that I can. However, every single transaction that's ever committed on the Bitcoin network is recorded on a ledger that's available to the public for anybody to go look at. Now, because that exists, there has been born companies that do things called chain analysis. And then they go back and they will, they'll try to connect all of these different accounts to a person type idea. So you have the surveillance mechanism that comes back into the transparency. But then there's other cryptocurrencies that are entirely anonymous. And the only way to break that anonymity is to correlate them to other networks, other purchases, to other, other data sources in order to correlate that information. So I think there's, from a technical point, we're working on this kind of in an interesting way, because I think there is a necessity in society for transparency from the upper echelons down. Otherwise, we end up in the situation we're in. I don't get to determine where my tax dollars go. And if I ask, I'm not going to get an answer, but yet bombs are going to be dropped in Yemen. And it doesn't matter if I can directly say that my dollar went to one of those bombs or not, because I don't have the ability to choose where my dollars go. The assumption is that at least in some part it went to that, right?
So, I mean, you're kind of referencing transparency within the government type situation. I mean, where do you draw the line, though, right?
Well, see, that's the thing.
People's personnel files part of that transparency.
Well, see, that's the thing. That's the thing, and then you get into like rights of privacy, right? And so this is another interesting aspect that, from a technological standpoint, crypto is working. So the idea is that there's this whole movement of Web3, is what they call it, which is kind of a shitty name. But the idea is that you use a cryptocurrency wallet to effectively log into websites. They don't have your information, your address, or anything. They just have your cryptocurrency wallet. And that could be an anonymous wallet. And then you can tie all of your medical information to that wallet, where the only way to access that is to provide somebody with a key to access that information. So there's privacy solutions in the works as well.
Right. So I mean, what you were saying, George, as like, transparency eventually being taken over by, surveillance. Like I don't know. I mean, I think there's always going to be that kind of element, but
I think you have.
I feel like, that even in your own personal life, whether it's your business, your place of work, those things are always going to be limited. Not everything should be available to everybody all the time.
It's an interesting statement. What do you think about that statement, George?
Not which part of it? Not everything should be available all the time.
Yeah.
I think it's inevitable in some ways, because if you look at the future of commerce, it is transforming from the idea of money is changing. And I think it's transforming, the medium of money is now transforming into the medium of attention. And in order to monetize that attention, you must, how can you manage what you don't measure? And the future, the blue ocean strategies of the future are all in behavior. They're all in consumption of things on the internet. They're in consumption of ideas. It's like almost the ephemeral. We're getting further and further abstract. And so I think that is what you see Google doing. I think that's what, in order for this dream of technocratic takeover, you must quantify everything. You must break it down. And the only way to do that is to drill in to the individual, to drill into everything and look at it. Because you can't manage what you don't measure. And so this idea of transparency is a gateway drug to surveillance, because surveillance is the foundation of the next level of commerce. It's surveillance capitalism. If you think about it from that aspect, in order to have this new world of strategy, Paul, you had told me the other night, the best way, capitalism must continue to exploit. It must continue to grow. And we're at a point where it has exploited the resources on the planet. Well, the next possible area to get into is to exploit the areas of the mind, is to exploit the abstract. The same way that the white people told the Indians, want to buy your land, now too are we coming up with ideas like, I'm going to buy your air. Well, what air could also be airtime. So there's this whole level of abstract mining going on. And it's based on the idea of surveillance, because that's the only way to get the information out.
Well, I mean, look, I mean, Ben just told us that the average education level of Americans is sixth grade. That's pretty fucking scary. All right, and
I
so
know.
like that makes me think like there's so much information out there. Like what do we need? We need transparency in government at work. So why? Like Ronnie Tang, you know what I mean, the comedian, is out there saying, got a bunch of D students running around out there, requiring peer-reviewed scientific information, in order to, make decisions on their health or whatever it may be in life. And these people out there, these students are out there podcasting now since the pandemic, right? And they're trying to tell people what to think, and they think they know. And the problem is these people aren't smart enough for transparency. Too much information for those types of people aren't good for any of us.
See, I would push back on this a little bit. I think that, and let me try to equate it to COVID. Like, and listen, I don't thoroughly understand complexity. I don't fucking know, but it seems to me that the level of information that is out there, it's not so much transparent as it is what's the opposite of transparent? Like
Cheesecake.
Obfuscated. Yeah, like so there's all this information out there, so you can't see the truth. Like you just have this wave of bullshit coming at you. There's like think about the idea of the uninterrupted presence of the visible. You know what I mean by that? Like no matter where you turn, like here in Hawaii, we're lucky because we don't have billboards. But when I go back to California, there's fucking billboards everywhere. There's like, boom, look at this on TV. Look at this magazine. Look at this person wearing this flashy thing. That guy's got a Beamer. He's got a Tesla. This guy's telling me how much money he makes. Like there is just this uninterrupted stream of things competing for your attention. Like you don't even have time to think. It's almost pornographic in a way because you can't stop, man. It's on you. And that, to me, is the opposite of transparency while claiming to be transparent. Look, we're showing you everything. No, yet you're showing me so much, but you're showing me everything but the truth because you don't want me to see it. And so I think that this idea of everything being bombarded on you is a way to stop you from seeing clearly, which would be transparency. Does that kind of make sense?
Well, it's like Zach De La Rocha, right? Rage Against the Machine, come and play, forget about the movement.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's an idea, but it's like, to me, it's these things are not like people are out there just doing what they do, and if while doing what they do, they're creating distractions in life for everybody else. You know what I mean? Well, that's everybody else's problem. Like we need to figure out, or you need to figure out as a person how to freaking, put all that noise aside and focus in on what it is you need to do, or what it is you want to learn, or how it is you want to see the world. It's like again, we go back to the sixth grade education people. That stuff works on sixth grade education people. You know what I mean? The election was stolen. That type of shit works on sixth grade education people. People that are unbelievably gullible, like Joe Rogan. That shit works on him. So it's like this is like the point to me, like of the podcast that we're doing here, like use of psychedelics, building a foundation of knowledge and being able to like form your own opinion and find your own way without being distracted by all the bullshit.
Yes.
I still don't think Joe. Go ahead.
Oh, I had a bunch of points in there. By the way, Joe, I love you. If you ever see this, please invite me on your podcast. Just kidding. I think there's a very interesting nuance to this that we haven't really touched on yet, and I think it's who's kind of pulling the strings for what is and what is not transparent, because that's an important part of this equation. Now, if imagine a thought experiment. We're all sitting in a community together, and it's pretty transparent because we all live next to each other. There's no strangers in the community. Everybody can hear everybody shout. That level of transparency between us is going to be, pretty obtuse. You're not going to be able to hide too many things. but you get a bigger and bigger community, and all of a sudden you need to have some authoritative figure who kind of dictates how things run. Now there's incentives for there to be privacy, for there to be shenanigans afoot, and usually it's economic incentives, because now we've all decided that we're going to pull our money together to make a better community. And so I think, it's who's pulling those strings and what are their motivations. And I think as long as we are driven through a capitalistic motivations lens in life, you're going to end up in a corrupted state where this is going to be abused and instituted through surveillance. And I think that's going to happen, because your motivations for why you're doing these things are not the best intentions for the individual, the end users. Your motivations are the best intentions for the system, or yourself as a part of that system, as an authority in that system. And I think that corruptive nature of that will, no matter kind of what you do from a philosophical, technological perspective, will inevitably corrupt itself, because those motivations aren't aligned with what we're trying to achieve as individuals.
Yeah, it's like me and George were talking about, last night a little bit, about people who claim to be leaders of others, right? And these people, some of them are morally bankrupt, but they have the ability to go out and actually talk to people, whether they're, right or wrong, or, whether they have, good or bad motives. These people have the ability to go out and do what other people, like smart people who are good people wouldn't do, for $1 million, put themselves into places where they're speaking for others, and possibly suffering the ramifications, for doing so, and when we think about, like you were talking about, like a community type of place, like most of those decisions that people make in the capitalistic world, like, like Joe Blow, the bureaucrat who's sitting there behind some desk, pushing paper all day, is out doing it because they basically want to serve themselves. And so when you get a bunch of people together that are, they have a job to do, of course, they're working under the umbrella of a government or a corporation, or a private business, they want attaboys, they want to be told that they're doing a good job, they want to be relevant, they want to have job security, and the way that they see, to do that is by doing what's best for them first. And so what happens is you magnify that by, like, many millions over, across the country. And you end up with a situation that isn't so good. You end up in a situation that I don't think that was, was intended to be bad, but, becomes that way because it's a reflection of people. Whether it's, your community that you're building and you want to have rules and laws or whatever it is, or the business or the government that you work for, you can't take selfishness out of the equation. You're never going to be able to do that.
I wouldn't say never. I think, a thought experiment. I think if you were to have a society that had a different philosophy, that was raised on that philosophy, had a different mechanistic way to interact with the world that wasn't purely capitalism, I think you might see different results. However, I would say yes, in the sense of what we have options in today's world, I don't think you see a change. I don't think that changes.
No, I mean, I don't think so either, and so this brings me back to what we were talking about earlier with having the memory, of an exhaustive run or a mental workout or whatever it may be, and then your body playing that in reverse, your mind playing that in reverse, so it can learn the things, that might have tripped you up during that run, or, something that you passed that smelled funny that, you may want to avoid next time, or, things that, you're not always aware of, but your body, like your body's bringing these things in, and then you're taking this time to process, that I believe that, through the use of psychedelics, like even at a low level, that you can begin to change, people's perspective or how they would perform their duties in the workplace, so that the collective, right, isn't me, I got to serve myself under the umbrella of this, of whatever I'm working under, and I'm this little tiny drop in this giant lake of shit, right? To where you can change it to where people actually change their motives, and people are actually viewing the jobs that they do more holistically, more communally, and not so individually. And this is another thing that me and George were talking about last night, because George is a big, individual rights guy.
Liberty, baby.
Yeah. Listen, okay, so here, I think I like what you said, Paul, and here's kind of my rebuttal to that, is the only way, like, it's so, it's like the biggest egoistic thing, and it's so arrogant to me for when people say, I want the world to be better. I'm gonna help change the world. No, you're not, motherfucker. You are not changing. You can't even fucking clean your goddamn room. You're gonna change the world?
Well, hold
Get
on.
away from me.
Please define better. Please define better.
Okay.
Please define good. Please define evil.
Okay.
Please define truth. You're not
Okay,
going.
yeah, like, let me give you an example. In today's world, there's all these people that are so worried about what's happening in Ukraine. Like, we're spending like in the let's just talk about the United States. We're split down this thing of like, oh, look at what's happening. Putin did this. Zelensky did this. Like, listen, neither you nor I can do nothing about that. Not one thing. Like, I don't know anybody there. I'm sorry. I love people. I love my community, and I love all those people. I'm sorry things happen there. But that has absolutely zero effect on me or anybody in my community. And if I want to change it, you can, but you change it by changing yourself. You change it by being the best person you can be. And once you do that, then you can begin helping your neighbor. But you don't start by saying, I'm going to go help this guy in Ukraine. Why? You can't help that guy. You don't even know what he's going through. You don't know him. You don't know why he's fighting. You don't know the rules on the ground. You don't know what happened. But what you do know is you can go on Twitter and put a flag on it. I'm going to help. No, you're not. You're just virtue signaling.
Right.
Why don't you go out and help your kid?
But George, if we'd taken that same attitude in the 1940s, we'd all be speaking Japanese, German, or Italian.
Well, no, we did, and we did until we got directly bombed. And if you look at the United States, it takes until they get directly blown up before they're like, okay, now we're actually going to go shoot back.
Yeah, but like, the United States government has, I'm not going to say come out flat out, but has made, statements that suggest that, like, especially in like Vietnam, that bombing wasn't really, like the Gulf of Tonkin incident wasn't really the Gulf of Tonkin incident. But we needed something in order to go ahead and do this. You know what I mean? To get, like support for a new war effort.
Right.
Yeah, that's a pattern. Back to the very beginning.
It is a pattern indeed. Yeah, and we have these patterns of false flag events to get us instituted into conflict because it benefits the people who make the weapons.
Right.
Sure.
And the people who make the weapons pay the lobbyists the money to get us to vote to get into those conflicts, or to vote to, allow them to send the $60 billion worth of weapons to a foreign country that, rewind 5 years ago, was the most corrupt country in the world by the headlines of the media companies today that are, putting up the Ukrainian flag. And it was after, if you look at what happened, there was a coup instituted, right? And that's where Zelensky got elected. And so, we're supporting all of these things that, from a philosophical level of what we would claim are our ideals, we should never support as a nation. Yet that's not what really happens. And I think we're starting to wake up to that on a massive scale because of the ability to share information, because of the ability to have conversations like this. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of this kind of unrest. We're seeing the doubling downs from the media channels. We're seeing the massive divisions of trying to get people to hate each other as opposed to look up to see where the problem's actually originating from. I think that this is kind of, we're seeking to answer a question as a society. The formulation of that question is we've done it this way. Why should we continue to do it that way when it doesn't work for the vast majority of people? So what do we do next?
I want to point out too a very perverse point of persuasion that's been happening. in the news, you see all these headlines, like, and it doesn't matter which channel, there's a debate going on. It was like, did we blow up the pipeline or did Russia blow up the pipeline? That's called a false choice. Like, that's a logical fallacy, because neither me, nor Paul, nor Ben, nor anybody I know in the United States of America blew up that pipeline. Thus, no Americans blew up that pipeline. Not one of us, none of us, zero of us. But they get you to say, was it them or was it us? Them or us? And no matter which one you choose, you're participating in the propaganda, and you're subtly believing, yeah, it was us. No, I think it was them. I think it was us. Dude, just stop. It was neither of you. What you're seeing is a loose conglomeration of multinational corporations and family offices struggling to control the resources and the supply chains for the next 100 years. And it has nothing to do with the people in any country. Zero. These are giant, multinational, multi-generational, either NGOs or family offices or sovereign wealth funds, but they're working together in conjunction with for a piece of those resources. And the way you get other countries to pay for it is by saying it's either them or us. Yeah. If you think, regardless of what happens now, USA is going to, if people say, oh, it was us, meaning the US, now all of a sudden we're on the hook for reconstruction for who knows how many $1 trillion. Oh, you guys blew the pipe, so you got to pay for it. No, we didn't. We didn't blow up anything. Why are you taking our money? But the fact that they get you to admit to it in the argument, us or them, means you're already responsible for it. It's a logical fallacy.
Well, and it's also manipulation.
Yeah,
it's baseline manipulation, because now all of a sudden most people, when presented with a choice like that, can't see beyond the choice. And so therefore there only is that choice, when that's not the reality of the situation, as you just said very well, without much fat on it at all. I loved it.
And we're back to the 6th grade education. What we're back to? Paul, what we're back to? We're back to gentleman conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. Shit.
Yeah, it seems like this is coming to a head. I don't see how this can continue to, and obviously things that are very large take a long time to unravel. Just, it's kind of almost a physics problem. But I think this is definitely all coming to a head. I think, we're seeing, because there's so much access to information, there's so much ability for us to recognize these patterns and these systems that are at play, that now those systems are reverting into emergency mode. And in that reversion to emergency mode, they just become propaganda-filled, rhetoric-driven drivel, right? Yeah. And meanwhile, all of us are starting to have conversations. We're starting to come around a dinner table. We're starting to break bread. We're starting to share ideas, which, to your point, has always been frowned upon from the upper echelons down in society, because usually when that happens, the upper echelons kind of make a little shift.
It's the invisible boogeyman, whether it's communism or whether it's terrorism, whether it's a disease, whether it's a plague, or whether it's nuclear war. These are all invisible boogeymen. Like, think about how fear. When you live in a state of fear, you're in fight or flight. You don't think clear. You don't have time to think. And that's part of the process. Like, we're moving faster than we've ever moved before in the world of developing policies and stuff like that. So you must continue to move at that pace. We jump from one cataclysm to the other, but they're all man-made. COVID, nuclear war, terrorism, communism. These are invisible ideas that are given to the people on the bottom, so they shut their mouth, they be scared, and they go hide in their hole.
So there was a conversation with Dr. Andrew Huberman the other day, and he was talking about the flight or fight. And he kind of retooled it a little bit, which I thought was just wonderful. And it's not fight or flight. It's the way he said it was, I'm on my heels, I'm retreating, I'm standing my ground, or I'm at a forward state of inertia, forward state of momentum. So that would be kind of the fight. But then if you think about that, we have the phrase paralyzed by fear, right? And I think a lot of people are paralyzed in that middle, just standing on their heel, standing on square feet with nowhere to go, and no idea if they should retreat or move forward. And I think that is the most advantageous state to have a human being in if you want to extract value from them. Because they're not running away from
Absolutely.
you, they're just standing right there.
Yeah.
They're
And it's
not
on all
fighting
levels.
you. Yeah.
It's nuclear war. It is a monetary issue. Like no matter where you turn, like I've noticed this as someone who goes out and like I'll probably have 100 conversations a day when I'm working. You know, I do at least 150 stops. I probably talk to at least 100 people. And I have noticed this level of animosity, I'll say. Like people are on edge. People are scared. People are worried about their families. They're worried about their finances. They're worried about all the crap on TV. And it's bombarding us. This takes me back to this unbelievable barrage of just negative stuff falling on you all day. Like you can't take that without feeling it. You know, it's like if you stand in a group and you had everybody yell at you and tell you all your negative problems, you get depressed because it's sad and you don't like hearing it, and it has an effect on you. The same way that television, the same way that talk radio, the same way that coworkers, the same way that bosses, the same way that every interaction you have is talking about something. And no matter what it is, it tends to be negative. Hey, we're going into depression. Hey, we're going to have a nuclear war. Hey, so-and-so died of COVID. Hey, I think that this thing might be man-made. Hey, I think that gay people aren't real people. Hey, I think black people, there's all this just bombardment on people. And it's so you can't think clearly. It's so that you're in one of those states Ben's talking about. And in a weird way, I almost think that should be celebrated because that means these guys are running the full court press and they got nothing left.
Yeah,
this is it.
All the cards on the table. They're all in.
Yeah.
And the perfect the way to combat this is no absolutes, right?
That's a great
Well,
book.
I mean, a lot of those people that you're talking about, George, that are out there afraid, it's because a lot of these have the ability to rationalize any of the information that's being given to them. And
right.
So they fall back to to fear. And there's a lot of fear-based people in this country, let me tell you.
Well, that's I think most people were taught to manipulate people through fear in this country one way or another. I mean, just look back to our worker bee system in the school. You have to appeal to authority. There's a fear component of that because there is a judgment that's going to be cast, right? In that appeal,
right.
You're not resolving. And so we're kind of bred into this fear response via our, these mechanisms of control that we've been exposed to.
Right. So there's rational fears and then there's irrational fears. And there's a lot of people in this country that are hung up on irrational fear. And so when you when George is out there and it makes me shiver, George, to think about who the hell and where the hell you're delivering packages to. If there's that many people out there that are that rooted in fear.
I see it, man. I see
without
it every
the
day.
ability to rationalize information, to bring information in and process it in a manner that that it makes sense, and then to understand whether these things should be feared or these things should be mocked. And a lot of the stuff that's going around right now, like people talking about all these fears, you see them on the news, you hear them on the radio or whatever. Most of those people need to be mocked.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But we have a sincere lack of reason in society, much to the the critical thinking. It really the word reason was not a word that I even really encountered in my life until I was on my own path. There was a reason for something, but I was never taught reasoning. I was never taught logical thought, until I started learning computers, and then it was just kind of, I had to. But then that kicked off a whole train of reasoning, a reasoning ability, which I've tried to foster for myself for the past 15 some years.
You've done a good job.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. But there is a general lack of reasoning ability in the world today. People cannot take two disparate pieces of information, look at them, and find some reasonable solution, mechanism, even definition onto why these two would coexist or potentially seem like they coexist. And If you can't do that, just imagine the state that you're eventually going to get in. Because now I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And then somebody who I'm supposed to listen to tells me, you should be afraid of all those things you don't know. Holy crap, what am I supposed to do? The guy who I'm listening to just told me I'm supposed to be afraid. He said, I don't know. Oh no. Yeah, and I think that's where we're at. And we combine that with the education levels. We combine that with the propaganda systems. We combine that with the education control system. We combine that with everything. And this is that conglomerate. This is the end recipe of that. This is what it turns out. This is the cake with the hole in the middle after you pull it out of the damn oven.
Yeah, I think, it goes to like there's two types of people. There's people that use fear to get through their days, and there's people that use logic and reason to get through their days. And like, you got to figure out where you are. But back to what you were saying, Ben, like some of these people that are telling that you need to be fearful of the unknown. The scary part is some of those people are actually giving people instructions on how to combat it.
Oh yeah. Well, not just some of them, a whole lot of them.
A whole lot of them.
Yeah, it's fucking wild at the end of the day. I mean, it's, one thing that I like to impart on people in passing is focus on the things you can change and not on the things you can't. That's a foundational step of reasoning that most people don't even have. Especially at an emotional level these days, I've noticed. But let alone in reflection of what's happening on a global scale, right?
Right. So we touched on this a few weeks ago when I brought up to the panelists, I don't know, it was probably 4 weeks ago or something, about we all here that participate in this Sunday chat, have taken personal time, right? Because we certainly didn't get the education that we have, or at least a lot of it, sitting at some public education school, so, whether it's through travel, association with different types of people, reading, participation in arts and culture and stuff like that, have developed a foundation of knowledge. And so, like, what would you suggest to people, like somebody who's listening to this podcast right now, who's like, hey, like some of the things these guys are saying make sense, and I would like to live my life with less fear. What would you suggest people to do, in order to be able to further educate themselves, have a better understanding of the challenges that are presented to them every single day, and to understand, when people are not being truthful, whether it's within government or media or, within like even the relationships that they have?
Absolutely. My first answer will be entirely selfish. There's a guy who wrote a book back here called No Absolutes. And, jokingly aside, it is a foundation, a framework on how to view the world to facilitate exactly what you asked. However, to remove myself from the equation entirely, if somebody wanted to just start, I would highly recommend go research the Hermetic principles. And you could type in Hermetic principles. There's the Kabbalion, which is a great introduction to that. These are old school things that have some very foundational and fundamental applications to the real world, reasoning, ability to put things into a perspective and to see the world from a different point of view. That's where I would start.
Nice. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. What about you, George?
I would say I would say
you have a friend of yours give you the books, the Illuminati trilogy by Robert Anton Wilson, and tell him to start there.
It's a great book, man. I'll tell you this. Conspiracies get you to ask questions. They may not be the questions that you or I would ask. They might be the ones that I would ask, but I think it begins the pathway of question asking. And I think that is something I would tell people to do is first off, do one thing every day that scares you. You don't have to be crazy, but maybe say something that you would normally say. Maybe tell somebody something that you wouldn't normally say. do one thing every day that scares you. Like, you know, just try that. And then try asking yourself, I got on my arm, I got a tattoo of Socrates, because it forces me to ask the question, is that true? And I always tell my daughter, like, ask that question. Whenever somebody says something, just in your mind, ask the question, is that true? And if it is true, then you have a series of responses that you can give. But if it's not true, you don't even have to give a response, because it's not true. You don't have to worry about it. But it's a great way for you to find out your truth. It's a good way for you to seek truth. It's a good way for you to begin the idea of investigating the life around you, your environment. Is that true? I don't know if it's true. I better ask some more questions. Is that true? I don't know. I'm going to go read a book. Is that true? No, that's not true. Well, then we can have a debate. But, I think that asking questions, is that true? And doing one thing every day that scares you are a great way for you to begin to thoroughly understand who you are and the environment in which you live. They're things that I do.
So can I know I didn't hear your answer. Great. Oh, can I jump in there? So truth is a funny word, right?
Right.
So what's true for me might not necessarily be true for you. I think that's a great foundational place to begin from.
Can't we agree that there are truths, though?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Mm-mm. Like, is it true that we see the sky as being blue?
Not everybody. There's people who, they see millions of different colors. Their perception of blue is entirely different than what yours is. There's people who don't see blue at all.
Is it true that, blue whales are the largest living creatures, animals on Earth?
Not necessarily.
I can help out.
I'm not saying ever. What I'm saying is like, there has to be some sort of accepted,
relative truths. Relative truth.
Right? I don't think conspiracy theory is the place to begin to asking the question why.
Oh no. I wasn't saying conspiracy theory. I wasn't saying conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I think that was what George was suggesting, when you mentioned conspiracy theory. And I've always said, conspiracy theory is intellectualism for dipshits.
It's a great line. It's a great line.
Because, it's not rooted in fact or truth. It's rooted in, theory.
Well, that's
so anybody can go out and conspiracy theories. Okay, I'm gonna tell you guys something here.
Break it down.
I'm gonna break it down. So conspiracy theories make people who aren't so smart feel smart, because they can have seemingly what they feel to
hidden
be
knowledge,
intellectual conversations that are not rooted in fact or truth. And so as long as you are not too absurd, but yet absurd enough, you could be taken seriously in some of these circles, right? And that makes people feel good. It makes people feel like, hey, I know something. It's the same thing. Like if you watch Fox News and you listen to Tucker Carlson or freaking Laura Ingraham or any one of those wackos on there, they don't ever name people. It's rare. They always say them or those people or they, you know what I mean? Because they know that their viewers.
Convenient.
Yeah, they know that their viewers are going to fill in those, them or theys with, with the homosexuals or immigrants or Muslims or Democrats, you know what I mean? And so it allows people to also then view, these conspiracy type people as hey, I'm on the same level as these guys. I know who they're talking about. I know, what's going on here. And in my echo chamber, circle of friends and family who also believe a lot of this ridiculousness, we feel like we are the intellectuals. It's the same thing when Ronnie Chang's you got D- students out there with podcasts demanding, peer-reviewed scientific information in order to take a vaccine or not.
Right. You said the right word, echo chamber.
Qualified.
Yeah. You said the right word, echo chamber.
Actually qualified to be having intellectual discussion. They could be, but typically they're from states where education is really poor.
Now, I would push back just a little bit. I think there is a slightly other perspective to view that from too. Is that conspiracy as a word was a very real thing up until it was attached to conspiracy theory in modern times. Conspiracy is that people are working behind closed doors to, come up with some sort of plot or end goal that they're not being truthful or transparent, back to our conversation earlier, to the people that they're supposed to be supporting in this endeavor. And there is still a lot of conspiracy. And there is, I think there is a value in promoting conspiracy theory from somebody who's trying to hide something. Because now, if I can, if now I have this whole group of people who are conspiracy theorists, it's just like me saying, hey, look, it's them, it's those people. And now I can distract, and and we have, through Freedom of Information Act, we have things, false flag stuff that we've done. So it's not all conspiracy theory. Some of it is, conspiratorial, and it was proven. So there's,
yeah. No, I mean the thing is, it's like it's been my experience with like conspiracy theorists, like the people who are actually putting out.
Well, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. I mean, like the flat Earth shit, right?
Right. Yeah. That's one right there. Or whatever. What's the new one? Like the furries and the cat boxes and shit that are in what I mean? Like, the stuff that's just like so crazy. It's like, come on, really? You're gonna believe that kind of shit? I'm not saying like in the history of public schools that it's never happened. But
sure, it probably has.
But it's not any sort of thing that anybody should be alarmed about. It's not even happening.
Well, and that's the thing that brings us back to the fear and the patterns, right? I mean, this is a very consistent conversation if we pull ourselves back a little bit.
I think slander becomes the tool of the loser when the debate is lost. The minute you start labeling people, this person is this person's a conspiracy theorist, this person is a Muslim. Like as soon as you start attacking their character, when you started saying something like that's kind of slanderous. It's a real easy way to end a debate. You're this. See ya. Really?
That's an ad hominem.
Yeah. So if someone has an idea that's silly, it's really easy to beat them. It's really easy to point out the flaws in their argument. But a lot of times people have at least some foundation for ideas, and they're not allowed to talk about them. Like if you look at the censorship that's throughout social media, there's a lot of things that are censored that are not conspiracy theories, but they're labeled as conspiracy theories just to go ahead and diminish them, just to put them in a category. If you think about that as a technique, like that is it's abhorrent. Like when you take away someone's ability to speak truth, like that is bad for everyone, because the ways people's minds are changed is through a solid debate. People can make up their own mind. Even the D student, even that guy that sat in the back of class that you think is a dummy, like that guy probably is pretty smart in some ways that were just not ways he could do listening to somebody preach about their ideas of English. Like I know plenty of people that are, I once heard a good quote that said A and B students make the best managers because they do what they're told. And if you look at some of the colleges, like look at doctors go to school for like 25 years or 30 years. By the time they get out, they're probably really good at some of the things they do, but they're retarded in ways. I don't mean that as a pejorative, but their growth in the social world has been retarded because they've been in this echo chamber for 25 or 30 years versus someone who's been out on the ground learning, taking beatings, learning their way through life. They have much more of a social understanding of the world. And so I think that we should be careful about just dismissing people as anything. In fact, wouldn't it be amazing if here's something I tried to do during the COVID, the whole COVID thing that went on. Like there was a lot of terms of conspiracy theory being thrown out there. This person thinks this, they're conspiracy. But the truth is, like, there's a lot of money being made in this whole mess. And I don't know who the winner is, and I don't know who the loser is, but I can tell you this, just taking a look at history, the best predictor of future behavior is past relevant behavior. And if you look at the past behavior of pharmaceutical companies, I can tell you they don't have the best interest of people in mind. And if we can all agree on that, then we must also agree that there's a very good chance that they don't have the best interest of people's health in mind now. And like that's a fact. That's not a conspiracy theorist. And I have never seen so many people jump on board. Like, listen, we all got to do this. Like, wait, what about all these horrible things that had happened 6 months ago? What about that? We're not talking about that. In fact, shut up. You're a conspiracy theorist. Get out of here. Like that is an incredible problem.
It turns into a term to slander people, like you said.
Yeah,
It turns,
exactly.
another one that's getting thrown around these days is a racist, a Nazi.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have all these terms that we're placing people in these little boxes, and if I could call
Yeah.
them that, and the people who listen to me because they are appealing to authority, because they don't have that reasoning ability, they're going to do the same thing. And that is essentially what our media on both sides of the fence is doing right now, is they are using that appeal to authority to deride, derive, and dismiss anybody who runs counter to their bottom profit line.
Paul, last night you were telling me, I had asked Paul last night, for everybody listening, like, we were talking about public shaming, and I'm like, I don't understand why we don't bring that back. And Paul had a great answer that kind of put me on my heels a little bit. Can you share that answer, Paul, with everybody?
Well, I mean, I think you were talking about public shaming and as being a, like a sentencing for committing a crime.
Yes, I was.
And so, I don't think that the government should be involved in shaming people.
Because it's cruel and unusual punishment, right?
Cruel and unusual punishment, right? And so, but that doesn't mean people aren't going to go out there and, commit crimes and do the time and come out and then, be shamed by their family or peers or other members of their community or on social media or whatever. That shit happens.
But
I mean, there's really nothing you can do about it. But we're supposed to be, as a country, and as a United States government, we should be holding ourselves to a higher standard. But we seem to be really drifting backwards, where some of these, what I would consider to be, barbaric types of, consequences for people, whether it's in this country or in others, and the way that we deal with people around the globe. And, I find it to be it's off-putting. We should be holding ourselves to a higher standard. And, so therefore, I mean, public shaming of people, I don't believe in the death penalty. I don't think government should be into retribution as well.
Yeah, I think, once upon a time when this country was first founded, there were some pretty clear lines defining, government and people. And those lines have been blurred dramatically, right?
Oh, yes.
And to the point where, now you can't go a single day without a single politician publicly shaming another politician, policy, agency, private institution, or even a private citizen. And I think to your point, there is something lost there, but I don't know that having that centralized power, I don't think that there's any other outcome to it. Because what happens is not only are we taught to appeal to authority, but now we are relinquishing authority to authority. And that has been a generational thing, to the point where, the rights of the past are certainly not the rights of today. And, the ability for the government to dictate, just look at a mask mandate, for instance. That's a wild thing. Especially when you consider that the information that was being acted upon was very much amorphous and was changing constantly. And, other factors and all sorts of different things conflating the situation. But now we end up in a situation where everybody, because they were taught to appeal to authority, is now, well, I don't like your authority, I'm going to appeal to the higher authority, I'm going to appeal to the higher authority, and eventually that highest authority is a president of the United States who, well, I don't think anybody says they've been great recently. I mean, you get some sycophants on all sides, but I don't think objectively.
How recent?
Boy, how far back do you want to go?
What, like Kennedy?
I don't even think Kennedy was great.
Oh, yeah.
How far back do you want to go? I think once we've been into the 1900s, you're looking at a diminishing returns. And I think before that, it was so much conflict of trying to figure out the place in the world that, you know, depending regionally where you are, you might have a very different perspective on that.
And you think the problem is consolidating authority?
I and the blanket education of to appeal to authority. We do not have conflict resolution at any level besides, oh, we're gonna call somebody in charge. It's gonna be the cops. It's gonna be a judge. It's gonna be a senator. It's gonna be somebody like this. There's no hey, we actually sat down at a table. We talked about it for a few hours. We had a couple drinks. George slapped me. We're all good. We figured it out. You know, but that was, I mean, and back to what we were talking about kids earlier, you know, as kids, that's what kind of happens. If we're allowed to fight as kids, all of a sudden I go punch Billy, Billy punches me back, and the teacher doesn't break it up because we're not around an authority. We're not around a teacher. There's nobody to go cry to. There's nobody to go run to. We settle the score. All of a sudden, he's my best friend. Because we settled the score, we settled our differences, we were able to bring ourselves to the conversation, to the table of conversation. Now, that doesn't always require punching somebody in the face. Obviously, all three of us are sitting here. I haven't punched either of you, and I haven't been punched by you guys. So, however, I think by and large, that aspect of community has been completely eradicated from our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, it's not always the outcome between two kids punching each other in the face, though.
No, it's not. No, it's not. But at the same time, the outcome might be they don't hang out anymore. The conflict resolves itself in some way. Now, that's not always the case either. Sometimes, because of bad situations and bad advice, those conflicts escalate. And that's why we typically in society do have the appeal to authority. There is somebody to call to mediate, right? But that used to be the adage of it takes a village to raise a child. Now all of a sudden it takes a police officer, a school, a resource officer, a principal, you know, and all this other shit. Counselor.
I remember when I was young, I watched the Brady Bunch. And there was this one episode where Cindy went to school and this kid was like, baby talk, because Cindy had like a little lisp.
Yeah.
And this kid was always messing with Cindy, like baby talk. She started crying. She comes home and she tells her dad, this kid won't stop. And dad grabs Bobby, like the little kid. Bobby, come over here. You're gonna learn how to fight. This kid is making fun of your sister. So next time when you go there, you're gonna tell him to knock it off. If he doesn't knock it off, you're gonna tell him there's gonna be consequences. And then if he doesn't do that, you're gonna fight him. And so like this whole episode is like Bobby goes there and then like the kid punches Bobby. Dad's like, what? Okay. So Michael's out there like showing Bobby how to box. And then like the last part of the episode, Bobby goes there and the kid's like, baby talk. And Bobby's like, what? Don't talk to my sister like that. He's like, what are you going to do, you big baby? Boom. Bobby's punching him right in the face and knocks out his tooth. End of game. End of like what happened to that sort of programming? Like that's such a way better programming than like, oh my God, I'm gonna run home.
What happened with that program is that, like I said, it doesn't always end that way. Some kids get punched and then like, you know, end up paralyzed, or they fall down and hit their head and then they can never think the same way again. Or, you know, heaven forbid, you know, some kids have actually been killed from fist fights with other kids.
Sure. And this is where policy comes from, and this is where regulation comes from.
You know, that's the reason why we just don't turn kids loose like this. You know, we're not, you know, it's not Vikings.
You know? Yeah. And so I think we missed the point at somewhere along the transition. Because the point is we don't want to encourage kids to go hit kids. That's not the point. The point is to figure out how to resolve the conflict, right? Now, violence is a pretty effective solver of situations, probably a good majority of the time. But if we were to actually have a system that wasn't indoctrinating people to be workers, but yet was effectively teaching them how to manage emotions, how to speak their mind, how to communicate, how to articulate themselves, how to respond when they feel a certain way. Now all of a sudden that conflict resolution doesn't have to be Billy go punching George in the face. It can be, you know, it can be a mediation of words. And yeah, sometimes those are going to escalate. still, even then. But this is all a process that should be the foundational aspect of how we handle these things. It shouldn't be the appeal to authority, because the appeal to authority, the give everybody a trophy even if they were last place bullshit, this is what you end up in a situation where now there's no personal responsibility to the situation. There's no personal authority either, because I'm not myself. I'm a part of a system. I'm a part of a tribe. I'm a part of a group. I'm a part of a school. I'm a part of a society. I'm a part of a culture. All of these things detach you from yourself, and us being able to resolve our conflicts at a personal level. I think the loss of, a personal responsibility on top of the disintegration of community is the root problem for many of these things that we see and are talking about. And I think, we went from this way and we went this way, and we missed the balance in the middle.
Yeah. And I think another problem is we have people in this country who are hearkening back to Leave It to Beaver and the Brady Bunch and Mayberry as like a better way of life.
Right.
That's also a problem.
It is. What's the definition of idiocy? Is repeating the same thing over and expecting different results, right?
Sorry, George.
No, it's okay.
No, but there's a point there, right? Because we need to identify what was missed on that process. Because clearly we're at the end of the process that is not functional at a large scale. So we missed something along that path, and we need to be able to identify where we came from to know where we ended up, and to figure out where we want to go.
Yeah, and I think that when people look back to Leave It to Beaver or the Brady Bunch, like I do sometimes, like I didn't grow up in the 50s, but I look back to a time when it seemed that people cared about each other more. And I don't know if that's true, but when I look back at those, that's what I think about. So it's not that I want to go back to a time of like black and white TV and racism and all this stuff, but in my mind, I look back at a time when when people treated each other better. And like I said, that might not be true, but in my mind, that's what I see. So that's what I want things to be back at. And it's in some level, when you talk about going back to something, I know you can't go back to things, but you can go back to the spot you were before you went off the rails. And I think that's kind of the metaphor people are talking about when they look at things. You got to remember, each individual is like their own story. Each individual is living their own life. And so when they talk about going back to an area, they're talking about going back to a spot in which maybe they went off the rails. And I don't think it's fair to say all these people want to go back to this time when there was all these horrible things, because that's not what people want. People don't want to go back to a time when things were horrible. People want to go back to a time when they made sense.
Well, they want to take the things that make sense out of that time, because now nothing makes sense. So the natural response when nothing makes sense is to revert back to the last time that something made sense. If I'm walking down the trail and all of a sudden I feel lost, what am I going to do? I'm not just going to keep wandering down the trail. I'm going to turn around, backtrack my steps to figure out where I lost the trail. It's a natural response that's kind of geared towards the exploration aspect of humanity, right? And so I don't think it's actually, people wanting to go back. I think it's, again, a lack of education, a lack of knowledge, a lack of ability to articulate these things. They want to go back on the trail where things made sense, where they knew where the trail was, so they can take their next step forward instead of wandering around in the desert.
Well, I think for progress, there has to be chaos at some point, whether it's individually.
That's a good statement. Hold on. That's a good statement. For progress, there has to be chaos.
Yeah. I mean, I think, when, whether it's like how we are living our lives, because we all been through like chaotic or, like points of our lives when we weren't functioning properly. But I think that's where growth occurs. And I think it's those challenges, whether as a society or as an individual, that it's not about going back. It's about continuing to go forward and making your way through either troublesome periods or chaotic periods in your life. So when you come out the other end, you're smarter, you're wiser, you're more nimble, you're better.
Well, that's the hope, right? But that's the hope of somebody who can reason through the world. that who can attach a system of logic to what's happening internally to them and externally to them. And like we were talking about, I think that is devoid of many people right now.
I think I don't know if I would use chaos. I would say struggle. Because I think when you struggle is when you grow. I think chaos is a situation in which there is nowhere to go. When I think of something, yeah, there's nothing there. So you lose all hope when there's chaos.
Well,
you don't know anything.
From a physics definition of chaos is just the lack of order, right?
Okay. Well, then that definition that I like that I maybe what we're going through right now is that chaos. Maybe all these things that are happening, maybe this dissolution of government, all these social norms that have been broken, all these different groups breaking out, maybe this is the very chaos we need in order to move forward. Maybe this is the fuel that's going to present the fire that we need to get us to the next level.
Well, it is. It got all of us out of our asses and talking together.
I think it's like, shit, I just had the word in my mouth, but now I can't remember it.
I hate that.
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
No problem.
And sometimes I think when we talk about going back, like we use the metaphor of time, like we're going back, but maybe back doesn't mean time. Maybe back means like a pendulum, like it's swinging back and forth, not necessarily back in time. Maybe it's just going back and forth.
Well, so I would think this kind of brings us into structures of things.
Okay, a systems guy. Here we go.
So, you could say the pendulum sways back and forth. We can say we're going back in time, right? But if we look at it from kind of, say, like a platonic solids, right? So we got a cube of things, and this is our existence. This is our reality. You're not necessarily moving back. You're moving within the system. As long as you don't move outside of the bounds of the system, then that would be moving back. But our system is something it's very amorphous. It's not a solid structure, right? It's all this chaos that we define order from. And so I think, it's not necessarily moving back. It's moving within the system to try to, plot our next step. It becomes more of a three-dimensional problem than a two-dimensional problem, if you will.
Yeah, where you can reach back. Maybe you reach back instead of going back, but you can reach back and apply that to the thing, and then push it forward.
And that would be as above, so below neuroplasticity, right?
Well, I mean, it's what we do as people, anyways, when we're confronted with, situations that we're not comfortable with, or we're presented with the unknown.
We move into our familiar framework.
Right. We go back to things that we understand and know to help us move forward through this unknown period.
This brings us right back to McKenna. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. Let's hear about McKenna, George. I love the guy.
Okay. This brings us back to McKenna, his idea of the archaic revival. When societies get stuck, they go back to the last place it was before they got stuck. The same thing happened in the Renaissance, right? Like they got stuck, and then they rebooted all the ideas of the philosophers. And so in a way, what you can see right now is this rebooting of a sort of tribalism. Like, look at the way shamanism is here. Look at the way ayahuasca is coming in. Look at the way these retreats are coming in. Look at this. This is sort of a throwback to archaic ways. We're seeing the absence of monotheism and the reintroduction of like a pantheism. There's all these gods now. There's churches coming up where you can go and worship Baba Ganoush or whatever it is you want to, the spaghetti monster, whatever. But there's this reintroduction to a time, and I think that this fits Ben's helical model. Like it's maybe it's not going back, but it's just reintroducing some of the old ways into the newer system. It's like building a second story on this new platform. Hey, let's take some of this stuff, this old architecture, and put it up here now. When we're building this new way. But in a way, it's an archaic revival. Does that make sense?
And as above, so below, if we look at just the archaeology of the world, right? This is exactly what happens, right? This is the arc of things. This is, we build on layers and layers and layers. If you dig down, there's just, more layers of stuff that we tried to do. Didn't exactly work out, so we built on top of it. We took a little from this, we took a little from that, and then this is our new iteration. And
Right.
iteration's a wonderful word for this. We are in a new iteration of society.
And I would
Yeah.
take, like, not that I think about it too. If you look at the end of nation states and this new emergence of city states, a city state kind of seems like, the like
Greek
not a,
throwback.
well, or like a giant tribe, like the Cherokees or the Nation of Islam. It's not doesn't really have a place, but it has a place, and like that's the same. Like that's an archaic revival too. It's an archaic revival of old social structures being tried anew because the last structure has fallen down, and so you're hearkening back.
Yeah, but it's not just hearkening back, it's hearkening back in conjunction
Hearkening forward.
with what we've done to plan the next step forward. It's saying, hey guys, apparently we left a brick out of the foundation over here. Maybe we should go back and figure out how to build a fucking foundation before we actually go off and build a house on top of it.
What was the Tower of Babel?
Oh, here we go.
Maybe there's something to be said when we reach a point where we've gotten to a point where we're too big and the foundation can't hold. So everything comes crashing down.
Right.
We have all these people. Yeah.
An improper foundation built on, improper land or what have you. I mean, there's a variety of variables there. And, interesting to note as well that our friends in the Far East, in India, in the Hindu text, they relate this to the Yuga cycle, right? So, it's not that it's unbeknownst to us through antiquity. It just so happens that we think we're always more smart than we were before, and we don't pay attention so much.
Yeah, I think the fall of man, like we're constantly losing ground, even though we believe we're moving forward. Like we're constantly forgetting all the lessons we've learned in the past. We're constantly learning. We're constantly, even in today's world of technology, like we're moving forward, but we're losing. For every technological skill that we gain, we lose at least one. We forget, like you were talking earlier about the languages that your parents work for this company, and there's all these coding languages they don't know. So they've lost that. And like that's happened in your lifetime, in your parents' lifetime. And that particular process seems to be accelerating. So the more quicker we give ourselves to the world of technology, the quicker we get away from the very things that got us to where we are. And like that seems to be like this giant fall of man that we can't get away from.
Don't know that it's that.
Yeah.
I really don't know that it's that.
Well, why not?
Because, for instance, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation without that movement of technology. And this, obviously this isn't going to change nations and foundation the future, but just imagine that it did, right? Well, a thought experiment. Just imagine this conversation kicked off a cascade of events that it was harkened back to. In order for us to have this conversation, we had to go through those evolutional steps of technology, of society, of culture, of humanity, and without that, we wouldn't be able to take that next step. Now, that's not to say, just like every step is not a forward step in what we do, and sometimes we do have to backtrack on that trail of things, right? But without that forward momentum, without that innate explorative nature of humanity, we would not be in this situation to create that next iteration of things. So I think there's some component that's necessary, and there is, and I think part of that necessity is the forgetting of pieces of the past. Just like we don't want Billy to go beat the shit out of George, we want to give him a better idea of why he doesn't need to beat the shit out of George, and he can resolve that conflict a different way.
That's well put. So you're saying, I should not say, so you're saying it, but it seems to me that what I'm hearing is that the process of forgetting is a necessity. It's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, we have to forget in order to learn what's coming.
Right. Well, there's only so much, and there's a technical term for this, right? We call it bandwidth, right?
Yeah.
There's only so much throughput that can happen. There's only so much bandwidth that we have accessible to us on an individual level, on a communal level, on a societal level, and that bandwidth, by necessity, has to forget certain pieces of information for it to continue forward.
But so if we play that through like 100 years, then pretty much everything we're learning now is going to be forgotten.
Well, but it's also going to be different. If you were to rewind 100 years and ask them to describe the world from 1922 to 2022, and we have examples of that, right? We can see where that stretch of human imagination kind of falls off. But then we can also see where the evolution of technology picks up, and the forgetting of pieces that were archaic, that held up that ability to imagine the future were.
I like that. That kind of brings about a beautiful idea of I don't want to say luck, but it brings about this beautiful idea of growth, because it kind of demonstrates that no matter who you are, you play just as big a role as everybody else, you know?
Right, and I think we can really ascribe that to as above, so below as well, right? And internal, externally, you know, that can be the individual experience as much as it is the communal or societal experience.
Yeah, I like it. I wonder, yeah, I like it. What do you think, Paul? What's your take on that?
Man, I don't know. I mean, it's something that I really haven't given a hell of a lot of thought about, you know. I mean, there are definitely clear examples of you know, past technologies, archaic things that, you know, are no longer relative. I mean, even from like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, you know. So, you know, we continue to move in a direction, you know, that, you know, we're bringing new things in and moving old things out all the time. You know, what does that do to society? You know, where do we go? I mean, I don't know.
And so this kind of brings us back to retreats and those fairy ferrymen and bridge keepers, right? Because then that's what gives value to those individuals, those groups of people, because and we're seeing it today. You know, you can't scroll down Facebook without seeing like the survival handbook, how to build 100 different things to survive, or, you know, what to grow, or how to make all these old timey foods and all of this stuff, how to live off the land. You know, so I think there's a lot of evidence that we can kind of correlate to this whole imagery that we're building here.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. Gentlemen, are coming up on the 2-hour mark.
Oh,
Got to tell you, man. I know it goes by pretty quick, man. I got to tell you, I really enjoy the conversations, and I enjoy getting to listen to you guys and challenge ideas and have mine challenged. And I feel like I come out the other side feeling pretty good about myself. So thank you for that.
Likewise, gentlemen. I really much agree. You know, the exploration of ideas is not something to be discounted. And to have the ability to consistently, from a perspective of, you know, relative acceptance, we're all kind of dicks in our own way, right? But from relative acceptance, to be able to be heard, to articulate our ideas and have somebody actually think about them and actually put them into some sort of perspective, it's wonderful. So thank you very much, George, for hosting this damn thing.
Yeah, man, I'm happy to do it. And so Ben, why don't you tell people what you got going on, what you got coming up, and what you're excited about?
All right. Well, BenjaminCGeorge.com, the No Absolutes podcast is off and rolling. Where every week's going to be multiple live sessions, hopefully growing. more stuff will be coming from that. I got a timeline that I'm building for my websites that's taking anthropology, geology, some little astrotheology, and a couple other things, and putting them into some sort of rough draft of, you know, where humanity came from, to maybe identify where we want to be going.
Yeah, I heard a rumor that Paul might be coming on your podcast pretty soon.
I don't know, Paul, you coming on my podcast?
Yeah, you know.
Hell yeah, brother. Let's do it next week.
Sounds good.
All right.
Let me know.
We'll do.
And now Paul's favorite part of the podcast is giving his information about what he's got going on. Paul?
Yeah, you know, I don't have a website. You can't really get anywhere. You know, I'm here on Sundays with the True Life podcast.
Epic.
You heard,
I'm
that's the
looking
Sunday.
happy.
That's the Sunday Sting for anybody who's listening.
That's right. Not to be confused with the Thursday Stig coming up.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, it's a good thing you got going on here, George. I appreciate the opportunity to, you know, share some of my wackiness with other people.
Not wacky at all, brother.
It's a little bit wacky.
Yeah, a little bit. I was trying to be nice. Come on, we're closing up here, folks. Come on.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good, and I hope people that are listening to this, you know, find value in some of the things that we're saying. You know, that's kind of my hope.
Well, and I think you said it yesterday too. Like, you know, I think that every one of us on this show is bringing a lot of value, and I think we all come from different backgrounds, and it's odd that we've all had some similar experiences, and I really think that that's what provides.
It's not odd.
Yeah, I know, but I love it. I love that all three of us can be like, yeah, kind of, no, but I really think that that is what people can take away, and ultimately, that's what we want, is for people to take away at least something from this podcast that they can apply to their life. And maybe they agree with one of us, or maybe they disagree with all of us, but maybe they can find value in us trying to work it out.
Yeah, that's I'd agree. I hope that's what they're getting.
Yeah, me too.
I feel there's untold value in a fantastic conversation.
Okay, we'll leave it right there. That's beautiful. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next Sunday. Aloha.